The sound on my porch was a pick scraping inside my deadbolt, and I sat in the dark and let it happen. It was 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve. I had left the house cold on purpose. I knew exactly who was standing outside because I knew the sound of those headlights. And I knew the particular laugh my brother makes when he's already certain he's won. My parents were out there too. What they were carrying that night was worse than a locksmith's bag. My name is Vivian, I'm 36, and this is the story of every Christmas they kept me from their table, and the one Christmas they tried to break into mine. If you've ever been the empty chair at someone else's holiday, you'll understand why I'm telling this. The first Christmas I remember counting chairs, I was 8. We had a long table with a scarred oak top that my mother dressed every December like a magazine spread, cloth napkins, the good china, a centerpiece of pine cones dusted with fake snow. That year I counted the places, because by 8 I had already learned to count. A chair for my father, a chair for my mother, a chair for my brother Holden, who was 4, 2 chairs for grandparents, 1 for an aunt, and then the table ran out. I stood in the doorway in my church dress, waiting for someone to notice the math didn't work. My mother noticed me noticing. She didn't get angry. That was the strange part nobody who didn't grow up in that house ever understood. She crouched down, smoothed my collar, and gave me the kind of sad smile you give a child who's asked a question with no comfortable answer. "We can only set so many places, honey," she said, and handed me a plate to eat in the kitchen. I told myself it was a one-time thing. A crowded year, too many relatives. I was a smart kid, and smart kids are very good at explaining away the things that hurt them. But the next year there was a chair short again, and the year after, even as the relatives changed, the table still never had room for me. It took 2 decades to understand the shortage was never about chairs. It was always only about me. And no one ever hit me or screamed at me. If they had, maybe I would have understood sooner. Cruelty announces itself. Absence just lets you wonder. What I got instead was a careful, quiet kind of nothing. On Christmas morning, the gift tags in my mother's looping handwriting read Gary, Holden, Mom, a few cousins. Mine was never among them. There'd be something for me eventually, handed over later with an apology built in. "We didn't want to spoil you." In every family photograph I stood slightly out of frame. Like the camera couldn't decide if I belonged in the shot. I learned to do for myself early. Made my own breakfast at 7, packed my own lunches, taught myself to braid my hair, watching my reflection in the toaster. By 12 I could run a household, and nobody had asked me to. I believed, the way children believe things, that if I became useful enough, good enough, the table would finally make room. I never once asked the real question, sitting underneath all of it like a stone in deep water. Why, in a family of 4, did the math only ever fail to include one person? There was one thing in our house nobody was allowed to touch. A small silver frame on my mother's dresser, turned slightly toward the wall. Inside was a photograph of a pale yellow hospital blanket, folded the way you fold something around an infant, my mother's hands visible at the edges, no baby in the frame at all. I asked about it once, maybe at 10. My mother took it from my fingers so fast and gently I never asked again. "That's not for little hands," she said. Every December, around the middle of the month, she would go somewhere else inside herself. Forget to start dinner. Sit at the window with her coffee going cold. My father would walk softer on those days, like the floor might give way. I only knew her worst distance always arrived right before Christmas, a tide pulling out before it pulled me under with it. It would be more than 20 years before I learned what that blanket meant, and when I finally did, it explained everything and excused nothing. I left the day after my 18th birthday. Spring of 2007. I'd been saving. The way you save for a flight out of a country at war. Babysitting money. Lunch money. A summer scooping ice cream. A winter shoveling driveways. By 18 I had $1,100 rolled in a sock, and a battered Civic bought with 400 of it. 1 duffel bag. A toothbrush. My diploma. The only photograph of myself where I was actually centered in the frame, taken by a friend's mother who didn't know our family's unwritten rules. Nobody tried to stop me. My mother was at the sink. My father read his paper. Holden, 14 and already untouchable, didn't look up from the television. "Call when you get wherever you're going," my mother said, and that was the whole goodbye. I drove 3 hours, stopped at a diner off the highway, and cried exactly once, hard, in the parking lot. Then I went inside, ordered eggs, and made myself a promise over the worst coffee in the state. Someday I'd have a place of my own. A real one. A door, a lock, my name on the deed, where no one could ever again decide there wasn't room for me. I started with a bucket, an actual yellow bucket, rags, supplies from the dollar store. My first client was a tired single mother who couldn't keep up after double shifts. I cleaned her kitchen so thoroughly, she cried, and she told to friends, who told to friends. For the first year, I slept in the Civic more nights than I'd like to admit, parked behind a grocery store. Every dollar split into 3 jars: gas, supplies, the someday house. When you've spent your childhood being told there's no room for you, you learn never to let yourself fail, because failure feels like proof they were right. So I overdid everything. Worked sick, worked holidays because they paid double and because I had nowhere else I was wanted. By 25, I'd hired my first 2 employees. By 28, I had a real office, a logo, a name: Hearthstone Home Services. We watched over houses while people traveled, managed move-outs, cared for the homes of the elderly. I was building, piece by piece, the exact thing I'd never been given: a place where everyone belonged. And no one stood in a doorway counting chairs. You'd think growing up would have fixed the ache. It didn't. The first Christmas after I left, I called home from a payphone. My mother sounded surprised, then distracted. Music and voices behind her. "Is that a party?" I asked. "Just family and a few neighbors," she said, in the same gentle voice she'd used over the church dress. "We can only set so many places, honey." I was 19 and 3 hours away, and I still said, "Of course I understand." I called less after that, hoping the math had finally shifted. It never had. Meanwhile, Holden got everything I never did. A catered 16th birthday, a rented hall when he barely graduated, a car when he wanted one, college money he never finished using. I told myself I didn't care. I cared. I'd built an entire life proving I didn't need them. And every December, when the same carols played, I was 8 years old again, in a doorway, doing math that never balanced. My brother grew up in a completely different family than I did, though we shared the same address. Where I learned to do for myself, Holden learned someone would always do for him. If he broke something, it got replaced. If he failed, a reason was found. He became a man who started things and finished none of them. A lawn business that folded, a delivery route that vanished, a consulting venture that amounted to a website and a leased truck. Each time, my parents covered the shortfall, mortgaging a little more of their own security and calling it helping. I heard most of this through a cousin named Tansy, who narrated the family to me like weather reports. "Your folks bailed Holden out again," she'd say. "That boy could fall in a lake and come out with a fish in his pocket, but the fish were running out. He'd married a woman named Quinn, and together they'd bought more house than they could afford, filled with more than they could pay for. Underneath it all, a debt was quietly building. The kind that doesn't vanish just because mom writes a check. The last time I saw the whole family together before everything that follows was at a funeral my father's mother. The one relative who used to slip me $10 and call me her second sunshine. Afterward, in the church basement, I tried for one afternoon to be part of my family, refilling coffee, clearing plates, doing the useful things, hoping useful might finally be enough. Holden found me at the sink, a little drunk on cheap funeral wine. "You don't have to do that," he said. "The church ladies handle it." "I don't mind," I said. He studied me, then said the thing I've never been able to unhear. "You know, you don't have to keep showing up, right? Nobody expects you to. You're not really one of us, Vivian." He said it kindly, the way you'd tell someone they had spinach in their teeth. Then he wandered off for more wine, and I stood there with running water and let the words settle into me like cold getting into bone. I dried my hands, and somewhere between the bad coffee and the folding chairs, I stopped, waiting for a seat at their table. If I wasn't one of them, their math could no longer break my heart. I would build my own table and decide who sat at it. The years after that funeral were the best of my life, and I built every one of them myself. Hearthstone grew slowly, then all at once. By 2025, I had 4 vans, 11 employees, and contracts across half the nicer neighborhoods in the county. When people went to Florida for the winter, they handed me their keys without a second thought, because they knew I treated a home like it was sacred. I paid my people well and on time, gave Tansy's daughter her first job, and learned the parts of business no one teaches you. Without quite noticing, I became a woman of some means, not television rich, but secure, the kind of secure where you check your bank balance and feel calm instead of sick. My family had no idea. We barely spoke. They still pictured me as the girl who left with a duffel bag, scraping by, paying for her pride. They never asked what I did or how I was doing. And because they never asked, they never saw what was coming. I found the house in September of 2025, on a street called Birchwood Lane, the biggest house on the block, 3 stories of brick, a wraparound porch, a turret room, windows that caught the evening light just right. Built in 1912, loved once, then neglected, needing the kind of work that scares most buyers off. It didn't scare me. I'd cleaned 100 houses like it, and I knew its bones. Standing in the empty front hall that first day, I could already see it. A long table by the windows, set for whoever I chose. I bought it with my own money, every dollar earned from that bucket, that truck, 15 years of refusing to fail. At the closing, I signed my name until my hand cramped, and didn't care, because every signature locked the house a little more firmly into mine. When the lawyer slid the final document across, I read the words at the top 3 times. Grantee, Vivian Castor, sole owner. I had been a person nobody quite counted, and now a legal document counted me as the only one. I sat on my own front porch that night in the dark and let myself feel it. 18-year-old me in that diner parking lot would not have believed it. I should have been able to leave the story there, a happy ending. But I knew my family, and I knew the moment they learned what I had, the math at their table was going to change in a way I wasn't ready for. It took about 3 weeks for the news to travel. Tansy mentioned the house to her sister, who mentioned it to my mother, and the temperature of my entire family shifted overnight. My mother called on a Tuesday, a day with no holiday attached, to say she'd been thinking about me. Her voice carried a warmth I didn't trust, because I'd spent 36 years learning the difference between her real warmth and her useful warmth. I hear you bought a big old place, she said, light as anything. We'd love to come see it. 2 days later, Holden texted for the first time in a year. No greeting, just questions. How many bedrooms? What I'd paid. Whether it was a good investment. Then one that made me set the phone down on the counter. Who's the house under? Just you? I read that phrase several times. There are questions people ask out of curiosity, and questions people ask because they're measuring something. I knew the difference. I'd run a business 15 years. I made tea instead of answering right away, and thought about the church basement. You're not really one of us. People don't suddenly remember you exist. They remember what you have. The warmth wasn't for me. It never had been. It was for the house. And every instinct I'd sharpened over a lifetime of watching this family was telling me, very quietly, to be careful. This is where most people in a story like mine make their mistake. They feel the bad feeling and talk themselves out of it. I didn't do that. I'd learned to trust the quiet feeling, because it was the only one that had ever told me the truth. So I called my lawyer, not a friend, not a cousin, but the real estate attorney who'd handled my closing, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Bridget Vale. I told her about the calls, the sudden interest, the who's the house under. I asked her point blank whether someone could take a house out from under you if they really wanted to. There was the kind of pause a professional makes before telling you something you won't like. It happens more than you'd think, she said. It's one of the fastest growing crimes in the country right now. She explained it plainly, deed fraud. Someone forges your signature on a quitclaim deed, files it with the county recorder, and the recorder doesn't verify signatures. They just record what's handed across the counter. Just like that, on paper, your house can belong to someone else. The terrifying part, she said, was who does it. Studies suggested roughly 9 out of 10 times, it isn't a stranger. It's family or a friend. I sat with the phone against my ear and felt the floor of my stomach drop. Not because it was unbelievable, but because it was the most believable thing I'd ever heard. There has to be a way to protect yourself, I said. There is, she said. Let me tell you about it. What she told me about was a free service the county recorder offered, a property fraud alert. You register your name and parcel number, and the instant anything is recorded against your house, you get notified. You become the first to know instead of the last. It wouldn't stop someone from filing. The recorder still takes whatever's handed across the counter, but you'll know the second it lands, and knowing is everything. I enrolled that afternoon. A confirmation email arrived minutes later. I printed it, then printed the recorded copy of my own deed, the one stamped with my name as sole owner. I laid the 2 pages side by side on my kitchen table, and looked at them a long time. One said the house was mine. The other promised I'd be the first to know if anyone ever tried to say otherwise. I didn't tell my family. I put the folder in a drawer and kept my voice warm and vague with my mother. Because the quiet feeling said, "Don't show them your hand." The number finally came to me through Tansy. Late October, breathless with news, she pretended to feel bad sharing. Holden was in real trouble this time. He'd personally guaranteed a business loan, around $90,000, for a venture that had collapsed by summer. He and Quinn had fallen behind on their rent, and the landlord had started eviction paperwork. My parents, Tansy said, had finally hit their own limit. 30 years of bailouts, nothing left to bail with. Your mother's beside herself, Tansy said. She keeps saying the family's going to lose everything. I hung up and stood in my quiet kitchen and did the math the way I'd always done it. 90,000 in debt. A man raised to believe the world owed him a soft landing. A sister with a paid-off house he'd just learned existed. A mother newly, suddenly, warmly interested in seeing it. The pieces did not arrange themselves into anything good. In November, my mother called with the first invitation in nearly 20 years. "We want you to come home for Christmas," she said, and her voice tried, for the first time in my life, to sound like it loved me. "There's a place for you, Vivian. There's always been a place for you." I had waited my entire childhood to hear that sentence, and now that it had finally come, I knew with sick certainty it was a lie. You don't set a place for someone you've spent 20 years counting out of the math, not unless you suddenly need them at the table for a reason of your own. I said I'd think about it. Then Holden texted, framed as concern, "Hey, with a big old house like that, you got to keep your important papers safe. Deed, title, all that. Where do you even keep stuff like that?" I looked at that message a long time. He wasn't asking how I was. He was asking where I kept the deed. I didn't delete it. I screenshotted it, timestamp showing, and started a folder on my phone, named something boring so it wouldn't catch anyone's eye. I began saving everything. Every text, every voicemail, every to-warm call. They thought they were reeling me in. They had no idea I'd started keeping the receipts. Then Quinn got involved, and that changed the shape of things. Sharp where Holden was soft, organized where he was scattered. She'd grown up the kind of poor that never quite leaves you, and had spent her adult life white-knuckling towards safety. She called one evening, chatting about nothing, then steered the conversation somewhere very specific. "We're thinking about doing a quitclaim between us for tax stuff," she said breezily. Such a confusing process. "When you bought your place, did you have to get the signature notarized? Does the county actually check who signed it? Or do they just file it?" Not a tax question, a mapping question. Exactly how much they could get away with. I kept my voice easy, said I wasn't sure. The lawyer handled all that. I played the woman who didn't pay attention to her own affairs, and I could practically hear her relax through the phone. Holden had the desperation and the entitlement. Quinn had the plan. He'd be the hand. She was the mind. My mother called again in early December and said the quiet part without meaning to. We were talking about Christmas, and she drifted into talking about the house. "It's just so much house for one person," she said. "A place like that, it really ought to be for the whole family. You shouldn't be rattling around and they're all alone, honey." And then, fondly, like sharing an old family saying, "You know how it is. We can only set so many places." She didn't even hear herself say it. For 20 years that sentence had meant there's no room for you. Now, turned inside out, it meant something worse. You're the one person to many. I closed my eyes and understood the whole thing at last. They weren't asking to visit. They were planning to move in, absorb the house into the family the way they'd absorbed every one of Holden's debts. Except this time they had no money left to do it with. This time they'd have to take it. My first instinct was to call Holden and tell him I knew. So I called Bridget instead, to ask how to slam the door before they opened it. What she told me changed my whole approach. "If you confront them now, here's what happens," she said. "They get scared, they back off, and you've got nothing. A warm phone call and your own suspicion. No crime's been committed yet. You can't prosecute a plan. So I just wait," I said. "I sit here and let them forge my name?" "I'm not telling you to do nothing," she said carefully. "I'm telling you, the law needs them to actually do it. Forgery isn't real until the forged document exists and they try to use it. Right now you have a fraud alert that tells you the instant they file. If they file, that's a felony with their names on it. If they come to take possession, That's the whole crime witnessed. You don't stop a trap by warning the animal. You stop it by being ready when it springs. I didn't love it. Every protective instinct in me wanted to fix it before it happened. But I understood. If I tipped my hand, they'd melt back into the warm fog and try again later, smarter. If I stayed the clueless girl with the duffel bag right up until they committed the crime in full, I could end it for good. So I made the hardest choice of my life. I decided to let them think they were winning. And quietly, I started getting ready. Once I stopped pushing back, they got bolder, the way people do when they think the coast is clear. The texts from Holden lost their chummy pretense. You really shouldn't have a place that big to yourself, he wrote one night. That kind of house should belong to someone who actually takes care of family, not someone who ran off and forgot where they came from. There it was again, dressed in new clothes. The same song from the church basement, now with a price tag attached. Another night. Mom and Dad are getting old. That house could keep this whole family afloat. Think about somebody other than yourself for once. I read these the way you'd read a deposition. Watching a man build a complete record of motive. And I let him. Because the best evidence in the world is the kind your target hands you for free. I typed back things warm and non-committal, each reply just enough bait to keep him sure I was softening. Inside, I was anything but. Every cruel message landed on the same old bruise. The doorway, the church dress, the math that came up short. But the bruise didn't make me weak anymore. It made me certain. And certainty is a very quiet, very patient thing. The alert came on a Wednesday, the 3rd of December, at 4:47 in the afternoon. I was in my office reviewing route sheets when my phone buzzed with the email I'd been bracing for since October. Property fraud alert. A new document has been recorded against your monitored property. I opened it slowly, the way you open a door you already know has someone behind it. A new instrument had been recorded that afternoon. Document type, quitclaim, deed, parcel, mine, grantor, Vivian Castor, grantee, Holden Castor. According to the county's official records, I had just signed my house over to my brother. I had signed nothing. I'd been in this office all day with witnesses and a calendar full of meetings. Someone had taken my name, forged it onto a deed, and walked it across the counter, and the county, exactly as Bridget had warned, had simply stamped and filed it without checking whether the signature was real. For one long moment I just looked at the screen. 20 years of being counted out of the math, and now a single sheet of paper had counted me out of my own house. I want to tell you I felt rage. What I actually felt was the opposite. Clarity, pure and cold and almost calm. They'd committed a felony in writing, with their names on it. Now I had work to do. I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning and requested a certified copy. I held in my hands the document that said my home was no longer mine, and made myself read every line. There was my name, in a signature that wasn't my signature. Someone had studied mine closely, gotten the shape of the V right, but the rest wrong in a way only I would notice. Below it, a notary stamp certifying I'd appeared in person and signed willingly. I'd never met that notary in my life. I photographed every page, noted the recording number, the date, the notary's name. Holden thought he'd stolen my house with a piece of paper. What he'd actually done was hand me a felony with his fingerprints all over it. And he had no idea I already knew. That afternoon I filed a police report with a detective named Garrison Holt. A heavy-set man with patient eyes who'd clearly seen a lot of families do terrible things to each other. I laid it all out in order. The deed, the forgery, the notary I'd never met, the dated texts, Quinn's question about the county, my mother's sudden warmth against the backdrop of $90,000 in debt. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished he said, "Ma'am, in 20 years, I have rarely seen a victim walk in this organized. I run a business," I said. "I keep records." He told me what I was dealing with was serious felonies carrying real prison time and that Bridget could file a notice of fraudulent deed to begin unwinding it in court. Then he said the thing I'd been circling towards since the alert first buzzed. A forged deed on paper is one thing. It's stronger if they try to act on it, if they show up to take the house. Possession is the part juries understand. My mother's been pushing me to come home for Christmas, I said. Then I'd think hard, he said slowly, about what they might do if they believed you weren't home. There was one more thing I wanted, nothing to do with the courts. I wanted the truth out where it couldn't be smoothed over. My family had spent my whole life rewriting reality in quiet rooms, deciding who belonged with nobody watching. I wanted witnesses. I wanted light. So I called a local reporter named Octavia Marsh, who'd been running a series all fall on deed and title fraud in our part of the state. One line had stuck with me that the cruelest version of the crime was the most common one, because the person stealing your home is usually someone you'd have let in the front door yourself. I told Octavia my story over coffee. The fact that it's family, she said finally. Everyone thinks it's some hacker overseas. It's almost never. It's a brother, a son, somebody at the table. Somebody who couldn't fit me at the table, I said. Until I had something they wanted. She asked if she could be there when it came to a head. I told her I thought it might be Christmas Eve, and that I wanted her to see it with her own eyes, so no one could ever say I'd made it up. She agreed. Now I had 3 things my family never expected me to have: the law in Detective Holt, the record in my folder of evidence, and the light in Octavia Marsh. Holt and I met once more, the 3rd week of December, to think it through. Here's where their heads are, he said. Your brother's got a deed on paper, but it's worthless until he can act on it. To sell or refinance fast, he needs possession. Locks changed. Looking like the rightful owner before you even know what hit you. And the fastest way to take possession, I said, is to come when they think it's empty. He nodded. We both already knew when they'd believe that. They'd believe it on Christmas Eve, because for 20 years the story my family told itself was that Vivian spent the holidays alone, unwanted. They had spent 2 decades making me the empty chair, and now that very story was going to trap them. Quinn will want a locksmith, Holt said. Change the locks, establish control. If a neighbor asks, they're the new owners. I thought about my mother pushing so hard for me to be far from Birchwood Lane on the one night they planned to take it. The invitation hadn't been an apology. It had been an attempt to get me out of my own house. So I declined gently, in a way designed to land exactly right. I think I'll just have a quiet one at home this year, I told her. I could hear her satisfaction through the phone, the soft pause of a plan falling into place. She thought she'd confirmed I'd be home alone, easy to work around. What I'd actually confirmed was the date, on Christmas Eve. I did everything they would expect of an empty house, and nothing they would expect of a trap. I parked my car 3 streets over and walked back in the dark, every window black. Inside, the house was not empty. Detective Holt was there with 2 uniformed officers, out of sight of the front windows. Octavia was tucked into the turret room with a clear view of the hall. And I was there, sitting in an armchair in the dark front parlor, in my good coat, a folder on my lap, the recorded deed that said the house was mine, and the fraud alert confirmation. That said, I'd be the first to know if anyone said otherwise. They'd been my anchor through all of it. Now they were going to be Exhibit A. My whole life, my family had set a table that never had room for me. Tonight, in the dark, I had set one of my own. I heard the car before I saw the lights. Tires on gravel, slow, careful, people trying not to be heard. Headlights swept across my dark windows and went out. Doors opened, voices, low, drifting up to the porch in the cold. I sat very still and listened to my family arrive to steal my home. I knew them all by their voices. Holden, talking too much, the way he does when he's nervous. Told you the place is dead. She's probably off feeling sorry for herself somewhere. A second man's voice, bored and businesslike. The locksmith. Quinn, sharp and low, telling everyone to hurry. My mother said, "Are we sure about this, Holden?" And he said, "Mom, the house is ours now. It's all legal." Footsteps on my porch. The thunk of a heavy bag. The locksmith. Standard deadbolt. 2 minutes. Then the scratch of metal sliding into my lock. The same sound that had opened this whole story. The lock gave with a soft final click. The deadbolt slid back. My front door, the one I'd promised 18-year-old me would always carry my name, swung open into the dark, and my family walked into my house uninvited for the first time. Quinn came first, flashlight swinging ahead of her. Holden was right behind, and he wasn't whispering anymore. "Would you look at this place?" he said, voice filling my dark hall like he already owned the echo. He had the forged deed in his hand, brandished like a flag. All this for her. And now it's ours. The locksmith hovered in the doorway, finally feeling the wrongness of it. Quinn was already moving deeper, flashlight, finding the parlor, the staircase. "We change every lock tonight," she was saying. "By tomorrow we're owners on record." My mother and father came in last, her hand, finding his arm in the dark. "It's so big," my mother murmured, and for 1 second sounded almost frightened of it. Then Holden turned in a slow circle and laughed. She never belonged in a place like this anyway. She never belonged anywhere. That was the moment. They were inside. The forged deed was in his hand. The locksmith's tools were on the floor. Every element of the crime complete, with witnesses in the rooms. I reached over and turned on the lamp beside my chair. The room flooded with light, and for a heartbeat nobody moved. My family stood frozen, blinking, caught mid-step. Then, as their eyes adjusted, they saw what I'd filled my dark house with. Detective Holt stepped out of the dining room doorway, calm and unhurried, badge already in hand. Behind him, the two uniformed officers. Up in the turret stairwell, Octavia, camera already up, shutter clicking, capturing every face in the room. I rose from my armchair with my folder in hand and looked at my brother across the hall of the home I had built, his mouth opened and closed. The forged deed was still clutched in his fist. Useless now, evidence now. What is this? He said, then louder, panic breaking through. What is this, Vivian? What did you do? Merry Christmas, I said. My voice did not shake. You can put the deed down, Holden. The officers behind you would rather you didn't wave it around. That was when he exploded. This is my house, he shouted, face going red, spit flying. It's legal. I have the papers. You set us up. You are always trying to ruin this family. Quinn had gone white and silent, her sharp mind clearly racing through every way this ended and finding no good ones. My mother had both hands over her mouth. My father hadn't moved at all. He was staring at me, and there was something in his face I had never seen there before in 36 years. Detective Holt did the talking after that, steady and quiet, which only made Holden louder. He laid it out, naming each piece. The quitclaim deed recorded December 3rd, transferring the property from Vivian Castor to Holden Castor, bearing a signature I'd never made. The fraud alert that notified me the moment it was filed. The dated, saved texts where Holden explained exactly why he believed the house should be his. The locksmith now talking fast, explaining he'd simply been hired to change locks on what he'd been told was a client's own home. Holden Castor, you're under arrest for forgery and filing a fraudulent instrument. The cuffs came out. And my brother, the man who'd told me in a church basement that I wasn't really one of them, was cuffed in the front hall of my house while a reporter photographed his face. Quinn was detained beside him, already talking about lawyers. It was my mother I turned to. She was crying the way she cried at the window every December. Except this time the grief had a name, and the name was getting arrested. Vivian, she said. Vivian, please. We can fix this. We're family. I looked at her a long moment, then said the thing I had been carrying my entire life, and said it without anger, which is the only way it could have landed the way it did. There were always enough places, Mom. You just never set one for me. So tonight, I set the table myself, and I set it for the police. The red and blue lights of the patrol car turned outside my windows, washing across the high ceilings of the house I'd built from a bucket and a truck. My mother had no answer. For the first time in 36 years, the woman who decided who belonged at the table had nothing left to say. My father didn't run, while Holden was being walked to the car, still shouting. And my mother guided out behind him. My father sat down on the bottom step of my staircase. An old man, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years, and put his face in his hands. The officers let him sit. I came and stood near him, not too close. Then, without looking up, I always knew it was wrong. What we did to you. The chairs, all of it. His voice cracked. I knew it every single Christmas. And I never said a thing. I didn't tell him it was okay. Because it wasn't. I didn't forgive him on the spot, because forgiveness like that is earned, not handed out at the bottom of a staircase. But I saw him, for the first time. The whole shape of him, a weak man who'd spent 40 years choosing his wife's grief over his own daughter. Why? I asked. Why was it always me? He looked up and told me about the first baby, a girl, born and lost before I came, and how my mother had never climbed out of that hole. And how having me so soon after had felt to her, somehow, like the world replacing something that could not be replaced. It was the yellow blanket in the silver frame. It was the quiet at the window every December. It explained the whole twisted math of my childhood, and none of it made the math right. She grieved a daughter, I said softly, by erasing the one she had. My father had no answer for that either. Here is what happened after, because I know you want to know. Holden and Quinn were charged with felony forgery and filing a fraudulent instrument. The case never went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming, and the recorded deed had both their fingerprints on the scheme. His hand, her plan. Quinn took a deal and testified that Holden had pressed the forged signature himself. Holden took a deal of his own rather than face a jury looking at photographs of him cuffed in my hallway. Both are felons now. The $90,000 he tried to solve by stealing my house is still $90,000, except now it sits on top of a criminal record. Bridget filed the notice of fraudulent deed, and a judge voided the forged quitclaim within weeks. The house was mine again on paper, the way it had always been mine. In fact, Octavia's story ran on the front page the week after New Year's. She didn't use my full name, but she told the truth of it. How the person most likely to steal your home is the one you'd let in for Christmas dinner. 3 people wrote in to say it made them check their own county's fraud alert. My mother was never charged. There wasn't enough to tie her hands directly to the forgery, only to the warmth she'd used trying to empty my house. But everyone in town read the paper. The woman who'd spent a lifetime curating how the family looked from the outside got to watch the outside, learn exactly what she was. She and I don't speak. My father writes me letters now, real ones, in his shaky hand, and I read them. I haven't written back yet. I haven't thrown them away either. As for the house, I changed every lock myself the next morning with my own hands, and Ray enrolled in the fraud alert before I'd even had coffee. Then I hung one stocking by the fireplace. One name on it, mine. The next Christmas, I set the long table by the windows, the one I'd pictured the first day I walked through the empty house. I filled it with the people who had actually shown up for me, the employees who'd become friends, Tansy, who turned out to be loyal under all the gossip, a few neighbors from Birchwood Lane, 12 places, every one of them full, every one of them set on purpose. For 20 years I believed belonging was something my family could grant me or withhold, like a chair they chose not to bring out. It never was. Belonging was never theirs to give or take. It was a table I finally set for myself. That Christmas, the biggest house on the street finally felt like mine. If you have ever been the empty chair at someone else's table, set your own this year, and lock your own door.
If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there might really need to hear it. If you enjoy intense stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Your support truly means everything and helps keep these stories alive. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from around the world. I'd love to see how far this reaches. Let's build a strong global community together.